I wanted to just spend about 20 minutes talking about this concept of real-time retailing. And this is what we're really starting to see as a really exciting opportunity within e-commerce. And it's about agility. It's about being able to move faster. It's about being able to respond to your customers. As Gil was just saying, you know, businesses that can move fast and respond are the ones that are going to win. And so how can you change not only your technologies and your business processes, but how can you change your philosophy as an organization around agility? So, you know, we live in this world now where we have, is that funny? We live in this world now where we are in a Facebook, a Google, and an Apple generation. And so, you know, what we've got is, I didn't put that down there, but what we've got is this world where we're constantly being, our expectations are being raised by these platforms we use. You know, we use Facebook, it gets better every year. You know, there are sort of 2 to 3 major changes to Facebook made every year. We have platforms like Google constantly making it easier to find information, and we use technologies like Apple, iPhones, and iPads that, again, it's all about convenience. And what this does is this raises the expectations of consumers that when they go to your sites and your brands, they'll have those types of experiences. So we live in a world where a small number of platforms drive the expectations of everything we experience. And so we now live in this age of where everything needs to be convenient and easy because these platforms and these systems have made that easier. And this is only going to get more and more pronounced over the next couple of years. And so what we tend to see is that this is driving a significant change in shopping behavior. And so here, for instance, you know, 80 to 85% of times people put something in the basket, they actually don't buy. You know, they put something in the basket, they show an intention of buying, but they don't actually buy. You know, is that being driven by the ease at which you can just go and search on Google for something else if you use Google Chrome? You know, you are literally no more than about 100 pixels away from the search box on Google if for any reason you don't think it's time to buy that product. You know, that is an incredibly sort of a disruptive way of shopping. Imagine you're in a store on you know, Main Street, and you're in that store, and your competitor is literally at the till asking you to go check their price or go check their product. You know, that's the online world we live in right now. And so how do you combat that? You know, looking at this other stat, we talked about this right at the beginning. You know, we spend an enormous amount of money on marketing online. You know, somewhere between $200 and $400 billion a year spent marketing online. 97% of the people you've acquired online will not buy from you, will never buy from your site. You know, again, this just is an incredible number that is only gotten, conversion rates have only gotten worse and worse over the years as we've got more devices and devices become far more prolific. And so again, it's understanding how do we create value out of those experiences when people come to our site? How do we actually understand what that user's intention was? How can we learn, even when they've decided not to buy or never to come back, how can we actually, you know, monetize that visit through the information they give us about the experience on the site? And this was something we did. We did a research recently across 200 million users on the Qubit platform globally. We looked at what is the revenue composition of this group that make up your value. And what we saw was that 0.03% of users made up 30%, almost a third of revenue for our customers. Now, that's pretty scary because if you think about it, you know, if you're optimizing your entire site and you are not actually successfully optimizing for this group, you could very quickly be losing revenue. You could very quickly be going into negative growth. And so what we tend to see is, you know, the importance now, and actually this stat has changed and influenced our product roadmap quite significantly, because if you need to be watching this group and making sure they continue to buy and visit your site, because they're the ones who make up your stable base of revenue. And it was recently in a McKinsey report brought out in June that talked about the importance of similar sort of stat, the importance of managing your business for this group of users, this group of visitors, but also being able to focus on a broad strategy of sort of bringing in new customers and trying to warm them up to your business. And I think one of the most sort of pronounced things that we've seen is that, you know, we're about to go into a new generation. We've got the millennials if your business is not optimized for the millennials, you are in potentially a lot of trouble, because these are the groups that are going to really start having the purchasing and buying power over the next 10 years. And so if your core revenue base is coming from Generation X, or what's the other generation? I completely drawn a blank. Y? Is it Generation X and Y? Okay, you're Y. Thanks, Emma. So that's why you laughed at my Facebook picture. And so if you're not optimizing for, if you're optimizing for these other generations, then that's a big risk in your strategy. So it's about being able to understand that. And looking at this change, what does this mean for digital marketing? What are the opportunities here to use this to your advantage and actually start to really capitalize on this type of information? And one of the things that we did is we wanted to actually get into understanding the organization today. So again, we are a technology company, but technology only solves one part of the problem. The major thing is how your business philosophy is, and ultimately how your business is actually operating. And what we looked at was we surveyed with Forrester 185 digital decision makers. And what we wanted to understand for these decision makers was, what is their focus for driving customer experience? What are their barriers to success in driving customer experience? And so we found some quite interesting stuff. So first of all, we found that 50% of the marketers we surveyed, and these were retailers, e-commerce, travel, senior decision makers. We found 50% were focused on improving the customer experience. So it's, what number would have looked like about a year, 2 years ago, would have been around 15, 20%. And that's because the focus was on marketing. The focus was on acquisition. So there's a huge focus on improving customer experience. The second thing we found was that this is a shift that's been discussed in a couple of different places in the last year. But marketing and e-commerce teams will have 84% of the IT budgets by next year. And so what we've seen is in a lot of cases, the IT team has been in charge of all the technologies that are used to influence the customer experience. And so what that has potentially led to is this third trend, which we saw that many businesses felt that they had to refocus because they had a lot of redundant technologies and they had a skills shortage for those technologies. So 72% felt that there was an overlap in different technologies to solve the customer experience problem, and 58% felt they didn't have the right skills in-house. And so one of the areas that we've concluded from this study was that that skills shortage was because there was it's marketers trying to do the job, but it was IT buying the technology. And so we end up with this sort of challenge where the marketers can't use the technology to do their job. IT don't understand, they're not comped on fixing the customer experience. So at the moment, there's not a lot happening. So it's a huge challenge organizationally we've been seeing. And even, it's a challenge from its very design that business and marketing teams have the sort of very different, business and IT teams have very different goals. One is to keep the site up and running, and the other is growth. And those goals actually oppose each other. They work against each other in a lot of cases. So, where do we see this going for retail? What do we see as sort of leading to the future of retailing? And it's really, Gil also talked about this. It's like, how do you compete with these giants? How do you understand Amazon's next move? Where are they going? I mean, Amazon has created the super mall, and they will be doing 26% of online sales by 2016. To give you a comparison, Walmart represents 10% of offline commerce. So Amazon is going to represent over 2.5 times the proportion of online commerce. So, how do you work in an Amazon world where a quarter of all our transactions are going through this one super mall? How do you work with that? And the other major question is, how can you, in other verticals, such as travel as well, Booking.com, I don't know if you guys how many people use Booking.com? So these are the Amazon of the travel industry. Again, following that strategy of immense understanding of their customer, personalization, and logistical excellence, really sort of bringing all those areas together. And they represent 50% of hotel bookings across Europe, so an even greater percentage is coming through Booking.com. And Europeans love to take holidays, in case you didn't know that. So, we see, looking at this sort of Amazon world, this Amazon and Booking.com world, we see this sort of three emerging parts to the web, emerging parts to retail web. Amazon owns the utility. Their job is to make the transaction as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, and really just simplicity. That comes at the cost of experience. That comes at the cost of discovery and serendipity, because it's very hard to bring the two together. And Amazon is working hard on trying to improve their fashion, their luxury fashion. They want to become a net-a-porter, but when you look at the $900 dress and it's recommending a bottle of water and some toilet roll at the bottom, you don't walk into Chanel and get offered a bottle of water and some toilet. Well, you get a bottle of water, but you don't get offered the toilet paper. And so that really is sort of the sort of opposing issue that happens within a utility experience. So that creates an opportunity for the experience web. And this is the fastest growing category online. This is the future of e-commerce, where it's about experiences, it's about serendipity, it's about actually almost like a news feed for brands. You go to these properties to read about the latest fashion trends. You go to these properties to get inspired about what to buy. And it isn't just purely about the transaction, it's about the relationship as well that you have with the brand. And Net-a-Porter has been absolutely dominating this space, and they're now a content business in many cases. They're actually creating their own magazine around this concept. So we've seen this sort of really sort of taking off, and this is we think the most exciting part of e-commerce. And the third area is the digitization. It's the app web. This is the what used to be physical, music, video, books, becoming apps, and you buying those in a digital world. And app and utility are quite closely related, actually. And so you see what Amazon is doing to secure those revenues in these digital categories with Kindle, and actually getting into the physical device and app environment to secure their position. But really, experience web is where we want to focus. We think that's the opportunity for real-time retailing, and the sort of combination of multiple business models coming together within that. And so, what we've seen is the opportunity here of developing the customer-centric approach. This is a stat by Retail Touchpoints. There's a 300% increase in propensity to spend from adopting a customer-centric approach. And that's being able to understand your customer from the moment they arrive to the multiple times they come back. This really is the future of being able to effectively maintain your position of strength. And our philosophy, we coined this term real-time retailing because the philosophy here was about understanding your customer and being able to do it in real time, being able to actually, as a new trend emerges, be able to respond to that quickly. And a couple of examples that we're starting to see emerge around this is, first of all, the online, offline, connecting online and offline world. That is, again, that's an advantage of the experience web, multi-channel, because in very many cases, utility web don't have that multi-channel position. They're usually just a pure play. So being able to join the dots between the experience in a store to the experience online, and Burberry, for instance, is even personalizing down to the type of water, whether you like fizzy or sparkling water in the store. You identify yourself as you arrive into the store. Really starting to bring that know your customer strategy. And at the same time, they're bringing online into the store where you can put the bag on the RFID receiver and actually see more information about the bag, and that's coming from their website. So they're really bringing those two experiences together, and that's a huge opportunity around that. You take the opportunity around cashing in on the latest trend, the latest fashion celebrity sighting, being able to say that actually we have this look that was talked about in the newspapers yesterday or on the news, being able to actually show that you have that and geolocate that, really gives you an opportunity to get people excited about what you have and actually giving them something completely unique that you could get in only really in the online world. Looking at things like creating urgency and telling people that you only have 3 items left, or giving any form of scarcity is a surefire way to actually getting an increase in sales. Because people need those hooks. People need to understand that this isn't always available. You can't just be lazy and come back when you feel like it. Genuinely, there are only 3 items left in this color or this size. So communicating that in an honest and transparent way we've seen it have, at least a 10% impact on sales. So that goes to show even for the products you stock themselves, you want to create a uniqueness and scarcity around those products. Users don't want to feel like you have, thousands of these same product that chances are they're going to see somebody else wearing this on a night out. They want to feel what they've bought is quite unique. Again, tying back to that real experience web concept. And then really being able to combine different pieces of information together into enhancing the shopping experience. And this is really around being able to bring weather into the location of the user. And we started to see some really interesting, I'll take you through a case study, impacts when you actually bring together weather information with the items that you have and you sell. And really, also getting into that, that sort of more dynamic and engaging content. So again, depending on what's going on in the market, what type of events are happening, being able to engage your customer with dynamic content around the event or the thing that brought them in the first place. And then getting into that more sort of efficacy of the website, it's about ensuring you have all the pieces set up to retain the user. So when that user is getting bored and giving up, that's the most common reason why we have a 3% conversion rate. Getting bored and giving up, that you're there to try and take that step to keep the user engaged, to just bring them back in. Again, offline experience. If you're trying to leave the store, somebody in the shop is often going to try and ask if they can help you. The basket abandonment catching is the online equivalent of doing that. And it's not just about giving an offer. I mean, that is effective. It's also about talking about scarcity and talking about reasons to buy the product today. So very, very powerful and almost an essential part of the web experience. And I think one of the things that retailers and e-commerce businesses are affected by every Q4 is the concept of the code freeze. And the code freeze is when IT says, it's our busiest period, we don't want to change the website. What they really are saying is our busiest period, we shouldn't try and change the credit card processing system because that would be crazy. But what is crazy is to not actually be able to respond to your customers' demands in your busiest trading period. Imagine if you get a 10% increase in your busy trading period by a real-time retailing philosophy. And so it's a much safer approach when you're really only changing the front end. You're really only changing the overlay and the experience in the presentation layer rather than trying to do entire server-side changes. So I think, again, it's about us getting that conversation with our IT folks about the relationship between this is a minor front-end change versus this is a whole platform alteration. And so I think the concept of the code freeze will alter a lot over the next year. We saw actually drop about 25%. 25% less businesses had a code freeze this year because of this concept, because of thinking more like this. And so, who do we see, as exemplars in this real-time retailing experience web? Gilt Group, they do a great job. The level that they go into is even customizing the fonts for male and female. Really interesting the level of detail they go into this, understanding and their customer and creating the experience. They have things on there around like how many items are left in stock, how many people are looking at things, the triggers that really drive conversion. Farfetch, one of our customers, these guys are using data to understand their customer, to drive the relevant content to the user. They give the user authoritative content as part of the shopping journey, and that drives sales by sometimes 20% by presenting the look and the authority on what their customers should be buying. And again, it's fun and engaging shopping experience. And then Superdry, really using data to understand the different product lines, the way the customers like to interact with their products, video versus music versus shots of models, and also using that in conjunction with things like weather and scarcity, and really starting to bring together all the aspects, all the best practices of real-time retailing. And so, a couple of tips on how to start thinking more like a real-time retailer. What we've distilled down, again, is that it's that composition of your team. It's how you actually organizationally structure yourself for this. And so what we see as best practice, and it's growing, this type of team, but we see as best practice, you got your data analyst, and they're there to find the insights in your data. Mining the insights in your data, that's your IP, that's your unique to your business. It's your customers and their behavior around your property and your business. That is a really big opportunity for you to understand your customer better. And then it's about being able to take that qualitative and quantitative insight and give it to a creative marketer who can bring it to life, who can bring the solution to life. And their role is about saying, okay, we've got a problem with this particular group of users who are going to the basket and then leaving. It looks like the problem is our delivery proposition isn't very clear for this part of the country. So let's come up with some really creative ways of explaining our delivery proposition. You know, in many cases, it really is as simple as coming up with a better way of explaining something to your customer at the right time. And then what we also see as best practice is to have that JavaScript engineer who has a beard. That's how we describe a JavaScript engineer. I'm not a JavaScript engineer. And what they do is they can actually build the more programmatic solution. And so the programmatic personalization is where you start to get very clever about what you show the customer in real time. And you know, countdown timers are really effective. You only have this long to buy before this expires. And you know, being able to write that in JavaScript is really flexible, really fast way of actually doing something quite sophisticated. And then the on-site merchandiser is there to make sure that the collection of products is right. The groupings are right. The way of really driving AOV is all there and a critical part of the team. And so this is what we're starting to see as the best practice team out there. And not only that, but even thinking of the way you compensate the team, the way people's bonuses work around this is potentially could drive a huge change in organizations. And there's a very large travel company in the UK that's based in the UK that actually has developed a comp scheme for their engineers where they're getting paid off the net promoter score that customers leave about the parts of the site they manage. So it's like directly commissioning them based off how customers say they like the experience. And so you know, you start to get into a really interesting feedback loop and change in behavior because it makes you completely customer orientated. So you know, we're starting to see more and more things like that. Very interesting. And so I think you know, at the heart of this customer-centric strategy is a data-centric strategy. And you know, data is an abused term. Big data particularly is a very abused term. It's sort of this golden haloed solution of we'll solve all of our problems. And the reality is very few big data customer-centric strategies are actually working or actually in place and effective yet. It's more like, let's just build a database and put a lot of data in it. And that's it. But how do you actually start to make this data useful is you got to go back to thinking about your customer. What do you want to know about your customer? And in the context of commerce, we want to know about the products they looked at, the size of the products, the color, the weight, the price that you're offering, the stock availability. If you can bring all of this information together as part of the customer journey, you can really start to understand what made a customer buy or not buy. And so today, your traditional Google Analytics setup is probably collecting like 1% of this information, and it has the opportunity to be collecting far, far more. So we're going to evolve a lot around this customer-centric data strategy and actually start to collect useful information that we can use. And in particular, you know, just actually asking your customer what they thought of the experience is very, very powerful. You know, you'll get 100% of information over on the quantitative side, and you'll get maybe 4 to 6% on the qualitative side. But that 4 to 6% of users who give feedback about the experience helps you create a sample of what all your users are actually feeling about the experience. And very, very powerful way when you combine qual and quant together in really understanding the behavior of your customers. And so that's, you know, our customers have found this to be, you know, some of the most powerful ways of uncovering the biggest issues on their sites. And so when you look at we did a piece of research around, in travel and retail, the usage of these different types of solutions, like who's set up well for personalization, who's set up well for real-time retailing. Most have web analytics. Almost everybody has web analytics, and that's a given. Testing and targeting solutions, so still 34% of retailers and travel companies still don't have any form of testing and targeting solution. They're not doing A/B testing. Like A/B testing is just bread and butter now for our industry. And in actually only 22% of retailers and travel brands were actually doing tag management. Tag management is growing faster than web analytics in terms of what is your essential toolkit. And it's a free product. Like we provide a free product, OpenTag, Google Analytics, Google provides a free product. Tag management creates that structure to your customer data. It creates that agility so that you can adopt new technologies faster, and it helps you work better with IT. So it's something that will become an inevitability. You know, we'll see in the next 2 years over 50%, and within the next 5 years, almost 100% of businesses will use tag management. You know, we thought it was such a standard type of thing you should have that we've been working with the Web Consortium, W3C, on making it as standard as HTML. It just becomes like HTML. And so that's where we see things go. It'll be built into your e-commerce site in the next 2 years, the data structure. So that's sort of where we see things going on that sort of customer-centric data strategy. And what that starts to enable you to do is get onto the exciting stuff. So rather than having your giant monolithic Hadoop infrastructure that doesn't do anything, you can start to actually say, well, we've got a customer-centric data strategy. We're collecting information, so now we can find insights. And so, you know, this is about finding things like people engage with content are more likely to convert. Okay, well, how do we introduce content more into the early stage of the journey? And you know, understanding those paths to purchase and actually inserting the right piece of information as they go through the journey. That comes through the insights. That comes through being able to mine that information effectively. And the thing that I get really excited about are like, you know, they're just these sort of general stats or general behaviors that we can start applying quite easily, which is that 33% more likely to buy at lunchtime. You know, that's when you have some downtime, you've decided that you're going to buy something, you're going to do it in your lunch hour. You know, if your site hasn't been reconfigured for the buyers, you know, you're losing sales. And so the ability to know who's in the buying, who's been to the site before, who's in buying mode, reconfigure your site so you're showing the products they were looking at before they were on their site has a dramatic, like 20 to 25% increase in sales by being able to reconfigure that at a particular time of day for the right user. So again, you know, that's what mining the insights leads to, being able to make those big decisions that have a big impact on sales. And you know, what we typically love to see is this ability to start developing a persona strategy. Actually, this is a very old marketing technique that can be reborn through online. And really what it's about understanding is, you know, you have different types of customers, and you thinking about what is our personalization strategy, what's our real-time retailing strategy for these types of customers. And, you know, sofa surfers, quick browsers who dwell on category pages, they typically come in on an iPad. You have big spenders, they are the very small percentage of users that make up 1/3 of your revenue. Basket cases, they arrive, they come, they're expensive, they come on paid search, they put things in the basket, but they don't actually end up buying anything. And then super shoppers, they're like the 0.001% that make up 10% of your revenue. They're your most important group. You know, what's your strategy for these 4 segments? And we see, or these 4 personas, we see lots of different, you know, as you get more sophisticated, going into maybe 20 personas that you operate with. And you operate around their life cycle, and you want to come back and buy. And so start with a couple, and then start to expand that out into a much larger number. So on to the execution piece. You know, really, it's about being able to do things quickly. It's about being able to fail fast as well. You know, typically, A/B testing, about 1 in 10 A/B tests actually gets to some form of confidence, of actual statistical significance. So 9 out of 10 aren't likely to work. Now, we're really trying to beat those odds by giving better insights and targeting before you actually set up an A/B test. But what you need to be able to do is work with a solution that is actually very quick to execute. You want to be able to change things in the matter of hours, see if they work in the matter of days, and then either push it to all your customers or get rid of it. If you want to see whether, you know, a new look worn by an actress at the Golden Globes, and you have that look, if you want to then, you know, 3 months later, IT has implemented that, it's gone. That opportunity is gone. You've missed the marketing opportunity. And so being able to align and work quickly is where we'll compete on in the future in retail. And this is, I forgot to give, so we actually put a video together around this concept of being able to retail very quickly. And what we wanted to do, what Qubit's all about is doing things fast. You know, our message is drive conversions fast. So we were launching a series of videos around how quickly you can launch a personalization versus different types of activity. So could you actually launch a personalization to solve the biggest problem for a segment of users from Ireland? Could you do it faster than making a cappuccino? Go ahead. So now what Jerry's doing here, she's logging in, she's doing an analysis across different countries, and she's going to look at, does a particular country have a lower conversion rate than any other country? And then seeing that a particular country, in this case it's Ireland, is lower than average, I want to then go to the qualitative feedback and understand what's going on. And they're all complaining about shipping cost. So it's a shipping cost issue with Irish users. And so now we're going to target Irish users with a shipping offer and not cannibalizing our margins in any way. So we have a whole series of these coming out around different types of personalizations versus doing things that we do every day. And really what the message is here is that this stuff you can do this quickly and it has a really big impact on your business. And so this is where where we're really getting excited about how retail is evolving into agility and moving fast and understanding your customer better. And really, what we've talked about today is sort of the approaches of thinking about this. But really, again, it's about that culture that thinks like this. It's that culture of moving quickly. And you go back to Facebook, this culture of constant evolution, constant testing. They are the ones who actually really sometimes take risks of annoying their users to do what they have tested as the best solution for their most valuable users. They launch different features that they see as being the future of social, and very often, they get punched for it and punched in the stomach for it. But the reality of it is, they tested it and they saw that it was going to have an impact that was good for the business in the future. So again, that's really at the heart of their culture. And so everything is about being able to say, we tested this and it worked, and that helps drive that culture of proving that this stuff has an impact. Being able to actually say, this was the uplift, this was the revenue uplift from this type of thing we did, helps to really foster that culture within the organization because it's proving that it has an impact on the bottom line. And so I just give two case studies to finish. One of the things that we've seen a lot of impact with is around weather. So actually being able to incorporate weather and geo data into the buying journey. And in here, it's really about saying, we have products, it's a different product discovery. We have products in different, that are appropriate for different weather conditions. And really, looks like the weather tomorrow is going to be like this. Buy these, here are the sets of products, for the weather conditions tomorrow. We can ship these to you by tomorrow. And again, it gets those people, it gives them that reason. It creates the scarcity, it creates the relevancy, it creates all those aspects that drive conversion. And so, it's about bringing different types of information together to do that. In this case, it had about a 12% impact in sales for Burton. And looking at, again, I talked a little bit about content engagement. Farfetch are doing the signposting of different content and different navigational aids through the buying journey, and it has a 17% improvement in conversions for them. And it really is, in this case here, they saw that a group of users wasn't really understanding the boutique concept of Farfetch, so they just directed people to their FAQs, their how to shop. And that sort of helpful signposting help drive that big impact in sales for a particular segment of users that were getting lost. And you don't need to show that to your regular customers because they know how to shop on Farfetch. And so that, again, it's what might seem as really subtle signposting has a very big impact on conversions because people naturally get lost. And what we're fighting at the end of the day is that mouse just going right up to the top of Chrome and doing a search and going through Google again and leaving. You know, really trying to help you take control again of the customer experience. And we talked a little about abandonment catching. And in this case, it was actually designed very targeted. Again, you know, margin is so critical in retail. You don't want to give away all your margin. You don't want to just give away a 20% discount for the sake of it. You want to try and tempt the user into buying with as many things that don't give away that discount. In the case of LK Bennett, they actually targeted a specific group of users that had purchased before, but were not buying. They were going into the basket, they were not buying. And what they do is they just tempted them with free delivery. So it was a very small impact to the margin for a group of users, of buyers, or previous buyers. And that had an 11% impact on sales on that most valuable segment of their customers. So it was a really, really powerful way of engaging the user, stopping them from leaving without having a very big negative impact on their margin. And so again, that's really been working for them. And so that's it for now. So I just wanted to, there's an event, e-commerce futures event happening on February the 5th. The e-commerce futures is an event that's been running in London for a couple of years. And so they're doing their first event in New York at Union Square, the W Hotel in Union Square on February 5th. So bit.ly Q Ecom Futures if you're interested in attending that. I know that the UK is a really interesting market for e-commerce because of the size of the country. It's 70 million people in a landmass the size of Alabama. So it's pretty concentrated. And that's actually made it an incredible market for e-commerce. You know, it's about 30% higher spend per capita on e-commerce in the UK than it is here in the US. And media spend online is about almost 30% of all media budget spent online now in the UK. So the UK is kind of a very different environment. And some things, you know, some things happen there first because of this sort of different environment. So great to learn from some of the UK at this event on February 5th. So do sign up for that. And also, you know, this is our first event in New York, and we've really enjoyed getting to meet some of you guys. And do stick around for some Thanksgiving donuts and any demos as well. We're going to be doing demos downstairs if anybody's interested. But we would love your feedback on how we can improve, what we can do better for the next one, which will happen sort of in Q1 next year. But yeah, bit.ly/Q feedback if you want to give any feedback on the event. And otherwise, if there are any burning questions. Are there any burning questions? Great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Gil. Sorry, quickly, Gil, thank you so much. Jeff, you have to go, but thank you so much for attending, and look forward to seeing you soon.